I just believe in the power of healing and restoration. And I know that if we can just come together and speak about the hard things, we can finally begin to heal. So, this is where we heal.
All right, well, welcome to another episode of This Is Where We Heal. I want to start this episode by saying that I am a woman who speaks for women because I am a woman. So to the men who are constantly in my comment section going, well, there's just two sides to every story. And well, what about me? Women do this to men too. I'm not speaking for you. I'm not a man. I'm not in a relationship as a man. I'm in a relationship as a woman, so I'm not going to speak on your perspective. And I'm so sick of it.
Also,
I'm so sick of men jumping in every comment section wanting to like defend themselves for something that has nothing to do with you. Like, I can't speak for you. And even if I did try to speak for you, I would then get berated for speaking for men. But I'm not speaking for men because I'm not a man. Doesn't mean I hate men. Doesn't mean I dislike men. But I'm not going to speak for you. I'm a woman. And you all seem to think that women need to act more like women. So let me be a woman and speak as a woman. God.
Tell me you're an abusive asshole without telling me.
Right. Reveal yourself without having to reveal yourself.
Also, if you're that passionate about it, maybe you should start your own podcast and talk about the abuse you went through, right? Actually, please don't, but...
You can talk about the perspective of the man and why he put his hands around her throat.
There we go.
Yeah, and I love how telling my story about being strangled, there are literally men in the comment section who go, well, there's two sides to every story. Yeah, because it matters what the other side of the story is when someone strangles you. Yeah, that side really matters. That side really matters.
Today.
For whatever reason, you know, even though that could send someone to prison, we need to hear their side of the story, right? Come on.
It's pretty bad. They should just make a reel out of what you just did, please, for the love of God.
I mean, I don't get angry.
Everywhere.
I don't get angry much, but it does make me angry when people feel like they are justified to say there's two sides to a story when a victim is speaking about their experience, especially when the victim isn't even saying the perpetrator's name. They're not even calling them out, which they have every right to do. Every right to do, but they're still, to protect them, they're still not speaking their name. So to get on a story that someone is telling about someone who tried to kill them and saying there's two sides to every story, since when did we care what the murderer had to say?
Thank you. And that's what I was going to say too. If those men hadn't intervened, you would have been dead that night.
Yeah.
The other thing about it is like this right here is the example why, what, is it 1 in every 4 people actually report their abuse, and then most of those people are not believed.
I can't tell you.
This is the example right here.
I can't tell you how many women have messaged me, even men actually, the men that have been in abusive situations, but they have said, I want to tell my story so bad, but I'm terrified what people will say
100%.
and how I will be treated. And if I've got examples of it. I've had friends who have come out and told their stories and that went viral and then were berated and belittled and demeaned and called a liar and called a whore and called a slut and told she probably deserved it and told there's two sides to every story. No, there might be two sides to every story, but sometimes the other side of the story doesn't matter because there's no justification for what they've done, period.
It's true. I mean, I had people literally lie. I've had them not be my friend anymore. When I talk about it, it was a whole thing. And then years of doing it, full circle moment, his wife called me and said, is that who you're talking about on all your content? And I said, yeah. Why? And she told me, because he started doing it to me too. And I remember pulling into a parking lot going, oh my God, here we go, full circle moment. And I was the crazy one. I was this. All his friends said that too, even ones who witnessed him do it. And then what's funny is the friends who witnessed him do it, it was the girlfriend who hated me of one of his buddies who told his wife, call Jamie because she will keep it a secret and she'll not talk to him about it and she's a safe place for you to go speak.
Wow.
So
that just goes to show you that you have to ignore the noise. When you come out with your story, it doesn't matter how people respond. It's about freeing yourself to feel the courage to just speak it out loud and knowing that you have a right to do that.
Yep.
Ashley, I have gotten messages from people from me sharing your stuff, reaching out and being like, Thank you so much for sharing that podcast. It is helping me so much. Like paragraph-long messages from people that have come across your stuff because of what I've shared and like thanked me and have told me how much it's helped them.
The thing we all have to remember is not everybody has enough courage to do this and have these conversations, but also that they're not hitting the little heart. They're not hitting the comments because they're terrified.
Yeah.
And instead, they're privately messaging other people or having things, or they're just watching because even just that moment gives a woman or a man who's been abused just a little bit of hope that someone gives a shit and that they're going to be okay.
Yep.
And then they scroll down and they see some asshole in your comments saying something like that. And what does it do? Just that fast makes them scared again.
Yeah.
Like someone could literally stay in an abusive relationship longer and be killed because of some jerk's comment and he doesn't realize the gravity of his words.
Right. Yeah. Right. You know,
that's just reality.
Something kind of crazy happened yesterday. I'm not going to say who, but there's a person in my life who's in an abusive relationship, and she has gone back and forth. And of course, a lot of her family has been estranged from her because of this, because people that aren't in an abusive relationship, it's hard for them to empathize. They don't understand the psychology behind it and the power of a trauma bond. And so we were talking, and she had tears running down. I literally ran into her randomly yesterday. And we were talking, and she said, yeah, I mean, my family's not speaking to me. And I said, that's okay. And I said, and I know it's really hurtful. We've all been there, that anyone who's been in an abusive relationship has been there. And it doesn't mean they don't love you. It's just there's some things that people can't understand. But in your healing, you'll eventually learn to have grace for them too, for not understanding. But anyway, going back to my point, the reason why I'm bringing this up, I asked her, I said, have you saw my podcast at all? Have you watched it at all? And she said, well, I've wanted to, but I can't watch it in front of him because I can't take the risk of him seeing me watching it, or I'll be in a lot of trouble. Mm-hmm. And that broke my heart because it's so true. Mm-hmm. And so I do realize that too, that like everything that is posted or talked about with domestic violence, they never get very many comments or likes. It's like the things that, like, you almost think, well, is anybody even watching this? Does anyone even care? But so many of the people watching it are the victims that can't. Mm-hmm. They can't because they're in fear for their life. Mm-hmm. They're in fear for what happens if their person sees that they're liking something like that. Mm-hmm. You know, and that it's so heartbreaking.
Or following your page. Remember you telling me about people who create fake accounts?
Yes, I have fake accounts that follow me.
Because their husbands don't know about their fake account, so they can actually watch and follow your content.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's terrible and so sad. And it's something I think that men need to understand, that it's so important for them to understand, because I think a lot of times even good men somehow get triggered by these conversations and think that we just think all men are bad. Mm-hmm. But there's a couple of things that come with this. Men don't maybe want to understand this, and it's hard to hear, but 99% of perpetrators are male. 99%. Okay, it's the same with sexual assault and rape, and it is the same with domestic violence. It is 99% male-dominated abuse. And so while we're not saying every man is bad, every man is responsible to either be a part of the conversation, to be the exception in the rule, or to at least defend and speak out for women that don't have that. Like, it's so important. And I told Larry Hagner this on our podcast when I did with him, is that sometimes it's the silence of good men that hurts the most.
100%.
Mm-hmm. Because I know they're out there. Mm-hmm. I know them. I know a lot of good men that say nothing. They are silent. And they are sometimes the only ones that can really make a difference, because the women that are being abused and in abusive relationships can't speak out, or at least they don't have the courage to. But if more men came forward and said, we stand with you against this issue, it would give us more bravery too.
Mm-hmm. Well, and think about it, the women like us and other women who are speaking about it, who's listening to us? You know, most of the men won't listen, because it makes them uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. They don't want to believe that that's statistically true when it is. And I understand. No one wants to look at ugly shit in the face.
No.
Like, that we don't want to look at it. We pretend like it doesn't exist. And what happens when we don't look at it?
Yeah.
We could talk for 15 hours about statistics across the board with different topics of what happens when we hide something under a bush. And it's just, none of this conversation, and I hope everybody still listening realizes, none of this has a thing to do with hating men.
Nothing at all.
At all. I love men.
I love men.
I have more male friends than I do female friends. I always have, because I'm like a car girl, and that's my jam. And like, not all men are that way. Not all men have it in them. And no one is saying all men.
Yes.
Just like no one should be saying all women are capable of being hurt and abused.
if someone posts something and it doesn't apply to you, then it doesn't apply to you. Why are you all up in the comments offended by it? If you are offended by it, then your first thought is, she's talking to me.
Yeah.
Is she talking to you? Because if she's not, like if I'm reading something or seeing someone talking to someone about, I don't know, loving cars or whatever, like I'm not going to watch it and get offended or think anything of it because it's not talking to me. Like if you're watching someone talk about being abused and you're getting offended by that, why? Do we not all agree that abuse is bad? And if we don't, then maybe you're the problem.
Well, defensiveness comes from a place of feeling guilt. So that's the number one thing.
I have to correct what I said because I said the wrong words really quick, and I don't want it to be. I said that all women are capable of being hurt, like saying that everyone is capable of being hurt. That's not what I meant. What I meant is some people think only like weak women are the ones who fall prey to that, and it's like, no, all women. I just had to say that because I'm like, that's gonna get taken out of context.
All people. Like I am always shocked. I'm still shocked every day by how many men reach out to me that are in abusive relationships. It is still shocking to me.
They're shamed worse than we are.
Oh, but again, by men.
Yeah. Oh,
by men. That's the problem that we're not like comprehending here. Women aren't shaming men that come out about their abuse. No. At least I'm not.
No, it's other men that shame them.
None of the women are.
How could you let a woman do that to you?
Yeah.
She's just a woman.
You're a weak man. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the issue. Is it goes kind of, it's like the same thing when it comes to like sexual assault and domestic violence. Like, yes, men get abused too, but again, men are 99% the perpetrators. So this has to be talked about. It needs to be a topic of discussion. And yes, it's uncomfortable sometimes, but these are important things to talk about or they never change.
Well, there was something one of you said earlier made me want to tell this story, but I have a really good friend who her kid's dad is also my kid's dad. We became really good friends, and this is a long, long time ago. But there was a situation where she needed to get something from him. I don't remember the details of the situation. I drove her to his apartment, and there was like a glass door, like the glass sliding patio door. And so I waited in the car, but I was like sitting right in front of the patio door. And she goes in and they're talking, and then I see him grab her and like throw her against the window. I called the cops. They came, and she's the one that went to jail.
And this is the same person who years later was listed on one of those "Are We Dating the Same Guy" groups, and there was 30 comments talking about how great of a person he is. Yeah.
But an abuser, by the way.
But he is very much of his children, of multiple women, been to court many times.
He's broken multiple of his ex's noses.
Documented abuse.
Yeah, documented. And every single comment on that post was about how great of a guy he was.
And he was so funny. He's the funniest guy I've ever known. Yeah. And this is a problem.
Which is probably why you got pulled in to begin with.
Sure.
Because you saw that side of him on the surface level.
Because he's charismatic.
That all these women were talking about.
Why people were sending it to me?
No, I mean, when you met him, you probably thought the same thing.
Oh, yeah.
He probably was funny and charismatic like all these other women that didn't know him on a deeper level.
If you only knew him at the bar, you would love him.
Which is what most of those comments were.
Yeah.
And it was just terrifying. I remember that moment happening. It was terrifying because we all know the truth about this person. The person who asked the question did so anonymously, so it's not like we could message her and be like, hey, because we know this for a fact. It's not just, and that's the other, God, we shouldn't even have to say this. It didn't just happen to Samantha. It happened to like 4 other women that we know for a fact.
Yeah.
I shouldn't even have to justify that.
Right.
Like that makes my skin crawl.
One isn't enough.
Right. We have 5 and children and whatever, and yet that's the tricky part, right? That's the part that I think when you're talking about other men opening their eyes to these conversations, there are things that you can see. Yeah. Like you watch little control tactics. You watch the comments that they make. Like it's obvious if you want to see it. And the thing is that most of the guys who are abusive are extremely charismatic. Yeah. They are
usually successful.
They appear to be so loving to their partners. All of these things. And so it's like, it's a sheep in wolf's, or what? It's a wolf in sheep's clothing.
I knew a guy.
That's what's happening.
Very personally. Okay, that I didn't know was abusive, but his wife would always say that he was physically abusive, but then I would see them at church and he'd be rubbing her back and kissing her on the cheek, like almost over the top to where it was obvious. But if you didn't know, you didn't know.
Yeah.
But then afterwards he'd go and he'd beat her up and all these things. And it's like, you don't know what's going on behind the closed doors.
No.
Most people, and yes, it happens sometimes, but most people have no reason to just make up the fact that somebody is abusing them. What benefits do you get from making up a story like that? I mean, it doesn't even make you look good necessarily. It's an embarrassing thing. It's shameful. There's like a stigma around being a victim. Like, it's not like coming out with the story is like, yay, I can't wait to tell everybody this.
Yeah.
It's like, what does a victim gain from making up a story? And I don't think people think about that.
No, and I think that at this point, at this day and age, like, the law enforcement should be trained to see the difference. Like, you can tell when a woman is, you can just tell the difference. I've seen both sides of it. You can tell. And the person who was lying, I wasn't like, you're lying. I just asked more questions and it was obvious and she caught up in her, her reasoning or whatever. But like, we should be training law enforcement and people to be questioning people a specific kind of way to pick out those truths and not truths, because yes, some people will. Here's again, statistically, I don't even know the stats, you probably do, of how many women falsely report. It's minimal.
Under 1%.
Yeah, in comparison, but yet that's the conversation everybody talks about. What about the people who are lying? Okay, sure, some people do lie, and that's a teeny smidge in comparison.
Yeah. It makes me think of that case that happened, I don't know, 3-4 years ago. Gabby Petito or Gabby, what was her name? Petito. Where they literally, I don't remember if she had called the cops or what, but remember the police officer came into that situation. She was sobbing, bawling, and he was an abuser, right? And he's out there just chalking it up with the officers. They're laughing. They think that she's just a little bit emotional and a weak little girl and everything's probably fine. And he's, I'm sorry,
I thought one of the cops, though, had a feeling.
One of the cops had a feeling, so he put her in a different hotel that night. Yeah. But they didn't take any actions.
She was refusing to.
That's the whole point of what I'm trying to make, is that if they were trained and these are the signs, these are the things to look for, like, they could take further action for the person.
They can't, though, if the person is unwilling to admit what's going on.
Unless he physically did something that would give them cause to arrest him, they can't. Because I've been in that situation.
She was totally downplaying it, and the cop was like, "Are you sure?" And she wouldn't. And I'm sure there are multiple videos. I might be talking about a different one from you, but I know there was at one point the cop was trying to get her to say what was going on because he knew, and she wouldn't.
I mean, and that's the case a lot of the times with the victims. They don't want to, they're scared. Because if they don't do something, then I'm stuck here with him and I've told on him, I'm dead.
Well, that's the thing.
100%.
At the end of the day, nothing's really going to happen to them. What do they do? Go to jail overnight and then they're out? I mean, that's...
Yeah, the next morning after your abuser goes to jail and you have to go pick him up from jail and live with him, it's real fun. Been there, done that.
Yeah.
That's a great day.
Right.
Makes for a great day.
Makes them real happy when you do that.
I remember in my instance, he had quite the reputation with the local police. And it was the third time that they were called that night. And they told us after the second time, if we come again, someone's going to jail. I remember thinking to myself, like, I don't even know how to prove to you that, like, I'm literally not doing anything. What if they think it's me? And then the third time they came, he has a rep, and so they ended up, he was wasted and I was sober. That was also part of why I think they arrested him. They took him out, he played, everybody's outside, all the neighbors are outside, and it's like a whole, everybody's watching. And, prior to them putting him in cuffs, he was their buddy, joking, making jokes, and then he gets put in cuffs, and I started freaking out because he was pretending like, I really think he was pretending he had back problems. And I'm like, his back, like, you can't do that. And what he was doing, as the cop leaned in, he headbutted the police officer. So then they tased him.
That's on brand.
And it's super on brand. And then they tased him, and I'm like, oh my God. And then all the panic, because I know, like, I'm sitting there thinking, whose life is this? Like, whose life is this? This cannot be really happening to me right now. And then they take him to jail, no shoes, just in his underwear, literally. So I immediately go up there with clothes and shoes and drop them off immediately to him as he's getting booked. They didn't give him his shoes and clothes until right before they released him. And that was the worst thing they could have done to me. Because then he didn't believe me that I tried to get him out and I tried to bring him his stuff. And like, it was terrible after that. Yeah.
As if it was your place to do that.
Yeah, but it's like, you know what? I don't care if you don't like the guy. He's crap, right? You don't like him. You already know you don't like him. And then you're literally arresting him for having domestic violence calls at his house. And then you don't give him the clothing that's brought to him, so you piss him off even more. Like, sure, that might have made those officers feel good in the moment.
Yeah, they probably thought they were doing the right thing.
They were just messing with them, you know,
Yeah.
like, hey, you're an asshole. I'm not going to give you your stuff. But it's like, you got to think about the fact of what that then sent home to me. And it's just such a common, the unfortunate thing is that there's just a lack of desire for people to admit that these things are really happening.
Yeah, that's
so
right.
that they're not trained to think, oh, what are the consequences for this girl if we don't give him his clothes when she brought them in or whatever. We make him sit there cold and naked all night or whatever. They're not thinking outside of the box or outside of the moment, which they should be trained. You know, that's something that I do think we lack in is specific training just in general for a lot of things in law enforcement. And it's not the officer's fault per se.
Right.
And it's just, these are things that if everyone would have these conversations more and it was something we would be willing to admit is a problem, then maybe we could make things
more
different.
Help for people to get out of those situations. I mean, everything that we're saying, like, everything in me wants to just, even though I know the answers to why doesn't she, I know the answer to that. But still, as we're having these conversations, everything in me wants to be like, why aren't we leaving these situations? And I know why, because I have done it too. But it makes me want to ask, how do we get people out of these situations faster?
Right. But they have to want to. That's part of it. But another thing is like the resources though aren't amazing. Like, and I mean, and I'm so grateful for any resource. I mean, there are shelters for women all over, and I'm so grateful they exist because it's necessary. However,
They're always full.
Well, one, they're always full. You can't just get in, right? And that's just, I mean, it means we need more. But also, when you think about a woman who's in this abusive relationship and a comfortable home, like her home, the last thing she wants to do is leave her home and go to this place where there's strangers and people she doesn't know, and she has to take her kids there. It's like, not that it's better to stay, but it's also like, that would be hard. Like, it's hard.
If you think about, I mean, let's take this to a place of mental health for a moment and like maybe draw a comparison. So people who are depressed, unless you've never, and I know plenty of people who haven't been in that experience, but things that happen when you're depressed, when you feel frozen, or maybe you go like 4 days without brushing your hair, your teeth or something, and you don't even realize it because you're just in this state of depression. But people that have never experienced that don't realize it, or that have never talk about it because it's embarrassing, but it's just the reality of what happens to your brain. So when you go through these trauma situations, it's the same concept. Like, you're kind of frozen because your mind can't even comprehend your choices. And so then it's not easy to find a place to go. And then you're supposed to call, it just becomes almost what feels impossible to do in those moments. And you're worried about your dog, your car, your stuff, your kids, because they threaten to hurt all those things. We'll burn all your stuff. You'll have nothing left. I'll kill the dog. Your kids will never see you again. Like, all these things happen. And
they're usually in the power position in terms of money in those.
100%. And because that's part of it. That's part of the, like, I was reading earlier about the financial abuse, and people don't talk about that enough. There's so much abuse that comes from the ability, like, taking away another partner's ability to freely live because they have no finances available to them. They don't know what they, like, can't go to the store when they want a freaking apple or whatever it is, or God forbid she needs tampons and she, you know, doesn't have the money and doesn't want to ask. And like, there's a lot of abuse that goes on into that place. And then you think about, okay, well, if I'm going to leave, even if I go to a shelter, what am I going to do after that?
I have no money.
Yeah.
You know, I want to come at this too with the religious pressure for women in situations like this, or even men for that matter, but the pressure to stay married versus considering what's actually happening, especially when you think about the fact that a lot of abusers are charismatic on the outside. They'll volunteer and do things to make themselves, they're leaders in the church. They look great on the outside. So when a woman's coming to someone and going, I have to get out, like, hey, these things are happening, one, they're probably not really fully believed, or the other person is like, well, if you just did these things, you need to go back to your marriage. You got to work on it. It's important that you say, God hates divorce. God hates divorce.
Marriage is hard.
You need to submit to your husband. You need to respect him. You need to let him be the leader of your household. And if you did these things, and if you could work on these things, it'd probably get better. And it makes me so sad, because it's like, so many people are coming at this. They have no idea what's going on inside the marriage. They have no idea how bad the abuse is, and they're pressuring someone to stay there.
And I'm going to say something that's going to piss a lot of people off, and I don't care. Churches have no business counseling people. They need to send them to trauma-informed therapists.
Or at least become trauma-informed therapists themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there's nothing wrong with mentoring people, right? Like, I do it. I mean, Jamie does it. Like, there's nothing wrong with being a voice in someone's life.
But you're not providing marriage counseling to people.
True.
But the difference is that there's a lot, in what we do, there's a lot of weight in the experience of being someone that people come to as a guide, or to ask questions, for you to mentor them or whatever. And if you are that person, you have to understand and be willing to not do things unless you know the entire story, or unless you're educated in that place. You need to be willing and be able to set your ego aside enough, instead of saying God this, God that. It's like, you need to be able to ask the right questions, or send them to someone who can, because just because the Bible says whatever, you don't know what's going on behind closed doors. So for you to say that to someone is so damaging.
It's so damaging.
They'll probably never ask someone again.
Yep.
And instead, and again, that person just thinks they're doing the right thing.
Right.
But when you're giving someone advice from any perspective on something very serious, you need to take it seriously.
Yeah,
because you never know the impact of your words.
Right.
If you are providing marriage counseling to people and you are not a licensed counselor.
Because one, you don't know the signs.
Exactly.
You don't even know the signs.
You don't know what to look for.
Yeah.
So you're listening to two different people, right? And one's saying none of this is true, and the other is saying it's true. If you don't know the signs, you don't know who's even lying.
Yeah.
Right? I made a post like a couple weeks ago about this specifically because I'm really passionate about it, because there is like this, I'm a Christian, so not everyone is, and that's okay, but like I see it all the time, women that stay so much longer than they should have to, risking their own life, their mental health, their physical health, because they feel this obligation to stay, because the church will condemn them, or the church will estrange them.
Worst thing in the world.
Right, but there are things worse. And I made it a point in my post to say, look, like, maybe it's true that God hates divorce, but he doesn't hate you.
Everybody hates divorce. The person getting divorced hates divorce.
Exactly, and that's the point. Like, and I said that. I said, God doesn't hate divorce because it's this dirty thing. Sometimes it's absolutely necessary. God hates divorce because it's painful.
Life.
It's painful. Even when you need to leave, it's painful. It is hard, and it hurts people, and people grieve through divorces because it's really hard when you've bonded your entire body, mind, and soul to another person and you have to separate it. It hurts. It's painful. God doesn't hate it because we're these awful people that are just taking it lightly. And I'm not saying that doesn't happen, but God hates that we have to grieve something. And so when the Bible says God hates divorce, I mean, think about that.
Doesn't God hate abuse too?
That's what I was gonna say. He's not.
God also hates abuse.
Well, if I gotta pick one, I'm gonna pick don't get divorced, but let him keep punching.
God
you in
also
the
says,
face.
"Thou shalt not murder." And half the time, these women stay in these relationships and end up murdered because they're too afraid to leave.
Well, and also there's how much does it talk about, if we want to go biblical, like about respecting people, about treating other people the way you want to be treated, about treating them in God, like all of that stuff. It just doesn't make sense. Like to use that as your argument is irrelevant in my opinion, because everything else counteracts it. Like nothing else that you're saying. These two, and most of the time, this is one of my favorite things to do to people. When I ask someone why they believe such thing, they have no answer for me.
Right.
They don't know why. They have not thought about why.
They just heard it from somewhere else.
Exactly.
So if someone doesn't
dangerous.
have, like, as a Christian myself, so I'm speaking, for myself, but if I do not see the fruits of what the Bible calls the Spirit, like, which is kindness, compassion, understanding, love, grace, if I do not see those things in a person, I don't care what they have to say. about the Bible. I don't care what they have to say about my life or what I should do or what decisions and choices I should make. If they're not showing me what I think people should be acting like, if they're going to call themselves a Christian, then I don't care what they have to say.
Well, it's the same thing if you're hiring a coach, like, or a therapist. Like, you're not going to go to a weight loss therapist that weighs 500 pounds.
Right.
You know, you're not going to go to a coach who is living in a box and like doesn't know how to learn how to be successful.
Right.
You know, like, it's the same concept. Like, this is all just common sense, but when it comes to religion and politics, people lose their common sense a little bit.
Yeah.
And they don't think about that, because what you're saying is extraordinarily logical. Like, duh, why would we appoint the chief of police who's a murderer? We're not going to do that.
Right.
Because it doesn't make any sense. So as in, why would I listen to someone who is not living the things that they're trying to preach to me?
Title means nothing.
Agreed.
A person's character is everything.
And that's what, you know, it comes back to believing individuals who have been abused and are trying to figure something out for themselves, is that it says more about your character than anything else if you're questioning them as though they're making this up, or you're telling them to go back home or whatever. And it's just like, if we all really were trying to live in God's image and be this way, then nobody would ever have those conversations that way.
Right.
Like, that it just doesn't fit.
So true. So true. How many years did it take you to heal from your relationship, from your abusive relationship?
I don't even know how to answer that. I mean, I think we're always healing. I have things come up now in my good relationship that I didn't even know were things, because I haven't been in a relationship. And I mean, I can't even think of a specific example, but, you know, I mean, he's amazing. And there are sometimes I think, like, why is he with me? You know, and I know in like my logical brain, well, because I'm awesome, of course. You know, but it's like those almost like deep-rooted subconscious beliefs that I didn't even know were there, because I've done so much work on myself. I've done so much therapy. And I was going to say this earlier when we were talking about how to get out of those relationships. I don't know that I ever would have left any of them if I hadn't been in therapy, because it's like there are these spurts of getting the motivation, and you're going to make a change and you're not going to settle for it, but you slip right back into it, one conversation, and you're back in. And without really working on yourself first, it's really hard to actually get out of it. So to answer your question, I don't know. I think I'm still healing, honestly.
I 100% agree. What about you, Jamie?
I actually didn't have therapy for like over 5-6 years after I left, because it just wasn't available to me. Nobody in my family had ever been to therapy. No one talked about it. I didn't have the financial ability to. I had to move back in with my parents and, you know, try to function at my job, because I managed a lot of people and a lot of things. I think that as far as am I healed from it, I feel like after about 7 years or so, I had really dug into everything that had happened. The other thing was I also dated a lot after that, and I feel like things like Sam was mentioning is very real, where stuff that you don't realize is a wound shows up in a new relationship because you're just not aware that something can trigger it so much. So I experienced a lot of that stuff earlier than I probably would have if I would have been older and like had more space between, like, and I also didn't have a child to be raising, you know, so it was dating and whatever, and I was learning those things along the way. Like, is that ideal? Probably not. Like, I'm sure some of those guys are like, what the hell? But it was part of the process, you know. And I think that something that's also happened for me was, I think that full circle moment really helped me a lot when his wife called me, and I didn't freak out. I didn't panic. I was like, this is why I talk about it. This is why I've done this work. This is why I've worked so hard to make sure that it's okay. There have been things from previous relationships that were abusive that I would say I didn't know existed, even in the last couple of years, that I've had to be like, oh. And once you start doing this, like, you learn, oh my gosh, okay, that's where that's coming from, and you can kind of nip it when you notice. But like, it was in some of that old stuff was showing up, and it's still very shocking when it happens. You're like, wow, okay, I know where that came from. And I think the ability to talk about it when it happens is important. With a therapist, with your partner, if you're in a relationship with somebody that you feel trusted, you know?
Yes.
And also know that it's okay if tomorrow something that he did triggers me, and I panic. Something I'll say, I tell people a lot, it was very odd, like, we lived very close to each other for a really long time, but never ran into each other once. And I always say this because Jesus loves me. That's what I tell people. I'm like, Jesus loves me a lot, so I never ran into him. And I've been asked, like, what do you think you would do? Like, if you ran into him, because he's always trying to keep tabs. That's also a thing they do, you know, like they'll send messages. How are you? Like, me being in my current relationship, I got a big long message once saying, I just don't understand how you're dating an older man, because I know how important it is to you to get married and have children. So I'm just very worried about you. And I'm like, hell, like, it came out of nowhere. I'm like, who is, like, what? But that's, again, the way to keep a finger on it, the way to keep control, the way to, like, make you think he knows you so well.
Pretending to care.
100%. When it's like, oh, instead I want you to just still be caught up in me, is basically what he was getting after. But the thing that with that I realized is that how I would act if I saw him in public, he would act like we were best friends. Oh, 100%. He'd walk over and try to give me a hug, and I would probably freeze and be like, what the hell is going on? And, like, just exit stage wherever way I could get out. The thing that I think would get me is his voice. That was always the trigger point for me. I'd hear him far away. I'd hear him down the stairs. I'd hear him when he's coming in, you know, whatever. He's a very loud man. And that's the one thing that I'm like, I don't know how I would react if I heard his voice. And, you know, I think it would be easier if I saw him. But I think just the fact that we're having these conversations and letting people be aware of the fact that, like I know you've said in many interviews, it just becomes a part of who you are. And that doesn't mean that it's a bad thing. Yeah. You know, it's not like, oh my God, this terrible thing that I carry around all day. It's like, no, it's a part of who I am. I'm a better person. I mean, it probably would have been a lot better faster if that wouldn't have happened. But, you know, it just becomes a part of everything, you know, part of your DNA. Yeah, for basically. Sure. But
it forces you to heal.
It really does. It forces you to grow up. It forces you to do two things. You either heal or you hide from it.
Yes. And both are okay, because we've all been there. Yeah. I've had, like, I hid from my essay. I say essay because they'll cut it out. I hid from that for years. I didn't even want to call it that. Even though I knew I had been assaulted, I didn't even want to call it that. I just kind of, like, tucked it away and just acted like it never happened. And I've told this story multiple times, but until I saw a scene in a show called, what is it called?
Big Little Lies.
Big Little Lies. Yeah, that the exact same thing that happened to Shailene Woodley's character was exactly how mine went. Almost identical, the whole thing. And it was like, it triggered me, and it was like I got PTSD from watching that scene, because I had just tucked it away for so long and never thought about it and dealt with it. And I remember taking that to my therapist at the time and talking about that and thinking, you know, maybe this is what's wrong with me. Maybe this is why I am the way that I am. Maybe this is why I can't connect with people. And anyway, it was just, it's wild how we do that, how we'll store things away. And that's okay. You know, that's what I did. And that's what my body thought it needed to do. And my mind thought it needed to do for a long time. But I tell people this too, like on my page when I'm talking, is that, but the problem with that is that you can't heal from something you're not willing to look at. Right. Like, you can't. Like, it's like a wound. Like, you can't heal from a wound that you're not willing to look at and focus on and you know, and give kindness to and treat and take notice of. Like, you can't heal from it. You can store it away if you want to for a while, but it will be triggered multiple times in your life, and you will subconsciously make decisions based on that wound that you're not looking at without even realizing it.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Like, not just that it'll trigger, it will be a constant factor in how you show up in the world in every situation, how you operate. Yeah.
Anxiety, depression.
When you said that, it made me think, like, so it's funny that we've discussed this a few times about how we, like, almost categorize our abusive relationships of, like, the worst, and, like, this is the one we refer to. But there was a time a while, and I think I told you about it first, Sam, actually, when this happened to me. But I was watching a show or movie or something with my fiance, and the guy in it was suffering from severe PTSD after getting out of the military, and the way that he was speaking to his family and the way that he was behaving, like, I could just feel and see the just turmoil in him, and it took me straight back to Iowa. And it took me straight back to a relationship that I was very specific with everyone in my life. Like, I am not tucking this away. I am healing this now, raw, all of it. I am not tucking this away, which is like funny that we think we can do that. But then I remembered, and I did. I mean, I did deal with a lot of it, and it doesn't bother me very much ever. And like, occasionally I'll think about like what could have been, because it's sad, like the way it worked out.
Yeah.
But that moment of it took me right back to it, and I felt myself freeze for like 10 minutes. And then eventually I was like, I was like, we have to change the channel. And he's like, what? I'm like, we cannot watch this. And he's like, what? Oh, okay. And I said, it just is extremely familiar, and I cannot watch this show. And we ended up turning it off, and I like briefly explained to him why. And then, I mean, I see a therapist every week, so we talked about it, and I explained, and that was a part of it that I feel like the part we've discussed where like we make excuses for them was deeper in that moment, or in that situation, because I feel so strongly towards veterans, and I feel like they're treated so terribly, and they're not taken care of, and they're not given the help after they're getting literally beaten down.
So true.
They're not given.
Amen. Say it louder.
It's terrible. Like, that is something I could talk about forever and ever, and it hurts me so deeply.
Yes.
So I've also been drawn to men like that a lot in my life, and helped men like that a lot in my life. So to be in a relationship with him and watch that be something I couldn't fix, and I had to leave. Yeah. And I left very quickly. I didn't stay. Like, it was I handled it very well. Like, there was just
badass.
Thank you. Like, literally, it's that we always joke, it's like that meme where the person's like walking away and the whole house is on fire after that. That's what I did with all my stuff. Literally. All my things. Hey. And there's just a deeper thread on that for me because of the veteran aspect, because I know that a lot of that wasn't his fault.
Right.
Is it okay? Absolutely not. We've discussed it since, like, years later. We had a very, very mature, good conversation about it. He knows that he didn't handle anything properly. He knows he didn't take the help that was given to him. He knows he wasn't ready for a relationship with someone like me. Doesn't make it suck any less.
Right.
Yeah.
Do I want to be with him? Absolutely not.
Right.
Will that ever happen again? No. But it's okay to have those feelings. It's being a human.
You know, I'm sure you've heard this, but for anyone who hasn't, when they do brain scans on domestic violence victims, women who've been abused, they're the same as men who have been in war combat.
Yep.
That should tell you how
the trauma is real.
How traumatic it is to be abused.
Physical.
You can physically see it.
Yep.
And there's something you said that is such an important thing. I say this all the time to women in relationships that they need to get out of, because I was the same way in a relationship, not even abusive, like, not all relationships that aren't good doesn't necessarily have to be abusive, but if it's not good, it's still not good. And there was one that I stayed in for so long because of mental health issues and all these reasons in the world why I felt bad for him and why he had his own issues, and all of those things were true, but at the same time it still doesn't make it okay. And it's okay to leave even if the relationship just isn't good, and even if they have all the excuses in the world, legitimate reasons, and you can understand it and you can have empathy, that still doesn't mean that you have to stay in a relationship that you're unhappy in.
The thing is that a person's trauma that they're not healing will become yours.
That's what I was just going to say. It's hurting you either way.
It's going to become your trauma. And it doesn't make you a bad person to say, I can't take this on for you.
Right.
When they're not willing to do the work for themselves. And that's so hard for us to do.
It's so hard.
It feels wrong. It feels cruel. But a hurting person has to be willing to accept help. Because otherwise you both become hurting people. Just kind of like the tugboat thing analogy that you gave.
It's thinking about too, though, I remember it was horrible, and I felt terrible about having to make the decision of leaving, because I knew that I tried so hard to help and he just wasn't ready and able. Yeah. And I felt terrible, and then I was so fucking empowered by it. Because I knew that was a moment that I needed. It was whatever impact it needed to make on both of us, it did. Universe situation, it was that very much beyond our control, happened. And when I was like, that's that, I was very, very empowered by that moment. Was it still devastating? Did I still come home and cry and, know, sit on the floor in an apartment because all my furniture was gone and stuff,
Yes.
Yes. And I'll tell people all the time, it was one of the best things that ever happened to me.
Yes.
So there is a part where I hope people realize, and I hope they let themselves have, that you can leave a situation that was hard and that you feel like you hurt someone else, and it can be so empowering, because making decisions that are good for us to be okay is empowering. It's not bad ever.
Right. This is something that's important too. I just told the woman that I was talking about in our last episode, or maybe that was this episode, this yesterday. Once you realize that they're not helping themselves and that you can't change anything and you know it's time to leave, it doesn't get any easier whether you do it today or you wait 6 months. Because sometimes we're just like, well, maybe I'll have this point where I'm just done. I'm just fed up. You can't wait for that moment because it doesn't change. That moment never comes. Yeah. And the longer you stay, every day that you stay, it actually does become a little bit harder. But it's going to be hard either way. There's never going to be a moment where you think, oh, this is easy. I'm glad I'm doing it. I'm going to go today. You know what? I'm just going to leave today. And I'm feeling really good about it. That's not going to happen. No. It's going to be excruciating.
There's always going to be a reason to
There's never a good time.
We have this, we have that coming up.
There's never a good time. It literally is ripping the Band-Aid off because it hurts no matter what.
That's what I was just going to say. Every time that I've had to do something like that, I've had to do it that way, ripping a Band-Aid. I literally left my work. Dad, I rented a U-Haul. Dad's like, what? I said, I have to leave this house now. And my dad did not know I was in an abusive relationship because we all hide it.
Yeah.
And I said, I got to get my stuff out of this house and I got to get out of there now. We have to do it now. And he's like, okay, where am I going? So he goes and picks up the U-Haul. He meets me at the house. All my cousins come over. It's Christmas. I have a huge Christmas tree up, fully decorated. My aunt is taking my Christmas tree down. Was that the best and the most ideal time? Could I have gotten out of there like way faster and not had to listen to him screaming at me the entire time?
Right.
Yeah. But in that moment, I got up just enough courage to make it happen.
Yes.
So I pulled the trigger right then and there, and we were there all night. It was like a whole fiasco, but it was done.
Yep.
And if I would have kept waiting for the right moment,
you would have stayed.
Never happened. Yeah.
I wasn't ready to leave.
At you. That is like a vision. Every time you tell that story, I'm like, oh,
literally followed me through the house as I'm packing. Like,
I don't know how you did that.
Because my families are like, what's yours, what's his? You know, and I was trying to be fair and not take things that weren't mine. And he followed me around through the whole house. And my one friend was next to me the entire time. And God, how she didn't just punch him, I don't know. But she, and I just was sobbing, like, uncontrollably, like a vessel of me. And he was just following me around the whole house while we did
siphoning all of your
energy. That's exactly how, you know who I'm talking about, but how my ex was too. Like, that's exactly stuff he would do. And we always joke about that they're like the same person.
And they hated each other.
Which is
they grew up and like went to the same high school, and they hated each other. They were like enemies, and they're so similar. It's creepy. We didn't know each other then.
No, we didn't know each other.
I didn't know she dated him. This was like way after the fact, and I was like, wait, him? And oh yeah, it was a whole thing.
But actually, so when I was dating him, it's so interesting because you were like, well, nobody knows. Well, when I was dating him, my best friend like orchestrated a freaking intervention with my sisters and my mom, and because he was just the stereotypical, even if, you know, you didn't know he was just like an abusive asshole, like just every stereotypical, like, why would anyone be with this person? You know, he checked every box, just looking in from the outside without knowing anything, you know. So I went over to my sister's house one night. So we were like gonna have like a movie night or something. I go in, and then like my other sister's there, and my best friend's there, and I think my mom was there too. And then my other sister, I'm like, what's going on, guys? Like, I was like excited, like, oh, this is, and then they were like trying to point out to me all of the red flags, and I got pissed. Yeah. And I left, and I was mad, and first thing I did was went and told him, and I was, you know, yeah. I was so mad. And I mean, that was towards the beginning, and I stayed with him for years, but they saw it from the beginning, and if I'm honest, I did too. Right. But I just
in denial.
Yeah.
I didn't want to leave my abuser. I didn't. After everything we had been through, and I had been through, I still didn't want to leave. I wouldn't have left, but my mom gave me no choice. Yeah. Like, she came and got me and said, "You're coming with me. You're leaving." And I would have stayed, even though I knew, I went willingly because I knew she was right. I went willingly because I knew that if he didn't kill me, I'd probably kill myself, because I was so mentally and emotionally just in such turmoil that I just couldn't function anymore. But I still would have stayed. Mm-hmm. Like, I still would have probably went back to him if I had stayed there. But it goes to show you that, like, the people in your life that are speaking out, that are saying, like, it can save your life sometimes, even when you're not willing and wanting to hear it.
Yeah. It's just a tricky thing. It's one of those things, unless you've been in it, it's hard to understand. I know when I tell my story, people are like, what? Because I just told you the whole getting out story. I slept there that night. Because I was at my mom's house, and he called me crying. You stole Christmas. You're like the Grinch who stole Christmas. No one loves me. I'm here alone because his dad died. All these things, right? And I felt, and again, imagine this girl who had just walked around her house for 8 hours sobbing uncontrollably.
Yeah, because you didn't want to leave.
I didn't want to leave. I just knew I had to, or I would never get out.
Yeah.
And then in my brain, for some reason, it's like I felt like it was okay because my stuff wasn't there anymore. I don't know. So I did, and then it was...
Did your parents know that you stayed there?
Yeah.
What did they...
They didn't say a word.
Really?
I mean, they kind of, what could they do? I was a grown woman at that point. But they
No,
also,
I mean,
like...
I'm just curious.
Oh, I'm sure they were...
Have an opinion?
I'm sure they probably...
Sam would have been like, oh, hell no. Not on my watch.
Right.
If I had tried to pull that with her,
Well, here's
there's
the deal.
no way.
Locked in the room for sure.
She would have been like, if you leave here.
Well, Jamie, that back then, like, prided herself on being a badass. And, like, there was no one as ever telling me anything. Ever. I was going to do what I wanted at any time, and that's just the way it was going to be. And I went and slept there. I slept like a fucking baby. But, like, that is what those relationships do. Mm-hmm. You know, and then there was a short bridge where I was back and forth. And then it hit the fan one night. And it was like all the worst things happened at the same moment and in front of someone. And that was it. Mm-hmm. That was the end. Never talked to him again. Wow. Yeah. But that is... Then I didn't know that then. But statistically, that's typically how it goes. Yeah, like you had an intervention before there was a show about that.
Right.
Before people were
Literally.
doing that on TV.
Interventions suck, by the way.
So mad. I felt so betrayed by my friend because she told my sister some things that I told her, and oh my God, I was so mad, and I should have kicked his ass
And
straight
you
to
didn't
the
even
curb
realize
right
it was
then.
all out of love for you.
What I was going to say is think about what you were saying at the very beginning about when the guys in the freaking comments getting defensive. We get defensive when somebody says something bad about this abusive guy because we know they're right.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
But we love them, and how dare you say that? So we get defensive as if you're saying it about us.
And then if you admit it, then you have to do something about it.
Yeah.
So
Once somebody knows,
Yeah, it's never the
it's
same.
different.
Yeah.
It's never the same.
Yeah, nobody knew until
It's hard for people to support you and encourage it. You really struggle with that when you know, like, someone's
Now I
toxic.
do.
well, it's like the sign. It's once you realize it and you learn about it and you go through the healing, and the signs are always there from the beginning, but they start small, and it's like the controlling. It's always there from the very beginning, and it's like once you've lived it, you know what it evolves to, and so it's like, I mean, I'll cut somebody off at the first sentence.
I do now too. I do now too. But you know, it's like you said, if you ignore the small signs, you'll ignore the big ones.
It always gets to the bigger. I mean, every situation I've talked to a lot of people, and I'm sure you have too, Ashley, like so many instances, it's almost like they all went to like a class together.
Yes.
Learned how to do this, and I'm like, what? Like somebody in a totally different age, totally different part of the country, and I'm like, oh my
Same exact story.
same behavior.
Remember when you were talking to what's his face, and I was like, it's like he's reading the freaking manual. Like next it's going to be this, and next it's going to be this, and it was.
And it's like it becomes, once you know it's you can tell before.
I mean, I see it all the time. Like even on like the dating site thing, or the are we dating the same guy? A girl will tell her story about what happened, and someone will go, "But I feel like you just told my story. That was exactly what happened to me." Like it's wild. Mm-hmm. It's weird. It's like they're all possessed by the exact same demon or something. But
well, we talked about it on another show, but about like it really always does stem from this power and control desire, and most of that power and control desire comes from a place of insecurity. We have a lot of insecure, unhealed humans, and that's what they do. Is that an excuse? Absolutely not. And then there's other factors of their lives that breed into it and make it bigger. And some people do have sociopath tendencies and things that make it bigger and all this stuff. But a lot of these guys, they don't start out punching you in the face.
No, they don't.
Right.
You know, they don't start out throwing you up against the wall.
Right.
If that's like
The first thing that happens.
Yeah, if you go on a first date and someone punches you, you'll never see him again. It's obvious. Like,
Yeah.
But people act like women are or just victims in general, they're just so dumb. Why would you ever?
very small.
I'm sorry. If I would have known he was going to punch me or choke me, I probably wouldn't have been in that relationship. But if you don't know that going in, like...
Well, it's a tactic. Like, it's like you start very small, you just slip in little things and push that boundary until that becomes normal and accepted, and then they up it a little bit more.
They always
Always.
push for loyalty right away.
I had to change my phone
They
number.
want your loyalty
He made
right
me change
away.
my phone number because too many other men had my phone number.
I literally...
And I literally changed it. And I still hate that I changed it because I had the best, easiest number to remember of life before that.
I remember my ex
He threw
doing
my
that.
phone out the window
He
once
was
in a
literally...
Threw mine through the wall.
What?
He put
Yeah.
my other phone. I went through so many freaking phones. A glass of water once. And that was when I had it was a razor. It was
In the water? That sucks.
And a glass of water, or no, a glass of tea actually. Yeah, before
What a-
smartphones were a thing.
It's
so you
another
really
sign.
couldn't get them wet.
Like
You
men
think?
that are
Oh, you
super...
think that was a sign?
No, I mean like the whole like you can't have guy friends at all. Like
Oh, yeah.
most women when they're in love with someone, they're not entertaining other guys. Even their guy friends get very little from them.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? So it's like it's a weird thing for them to be so possessive.
It's because other men
Like-
see it before other women do.
Yeah, exactly. They know it because they're
Yeah.
I remember my ex doing the same thing. Like, you have way too many male friends, and he had more female friends than any guy I had ever dated. Close female friendships, but I had too many guy friends that I never even hung out with.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what? This is weird.
bizarre.
But I wanted to flip this a little bit. I told you about this, and I just told you about this. I want to talk about this because I want to put a positive spin on this, because it can sound like we're dogging men on one hand if like the person doesn't have the context for the whole conversation, but there are so many good men too, and I know that because my life was saved by the 3 or 4 guys that stood up for me when my abuser was dragging me by my hair down the sidewalk in front of multiple people. There were hundreds of people there that did nothing, but there were these 4 guys, I think it was 4, that stepped in, and they literally saved my life that night. And I didn't know exactly who they were for a long time. Like, I had an idea, but I didn't know because it was such a blur, like, the whole night. Like, I kind of thought I knew who it was, so this last week, I reached out to one of the guys just to ask if he was one of them because I wasn't sure. And he was, and he told me who the other guys were that were involved. And I reached out to all of them and just thanked them and said, like, thank you so much for what you did. Like, you may not know what an impact that had on my life, but you literally saved me that night. And they were all so wonderful and gracious, and they all said, like, pretty much the same thing, like, no one should ever be treated that way, and I'm so sorry that happened to you, and I'm so glad that I was there, that I could stand in. And they didn't remember it all that well either because they were all drinking. It was like a big event, and so they were, like, partially drunk, but, like, they still stepped in.
Yeah.
They still stepped in, and they called the cops that night for me. Like, and when it was, like, at the final straw and I was just about to escape, and it was just me and him, and they weren't there anymore, the cops came up, thank God, because they called him when they saw him still following me. And so it's just, there are such good men, but like I've said multiple times, standing up for victims is so important.
Yeah.
Like, men and women. Like, we as women have to stand up for male victims too more. And we probably are silent on those things too a lot of the times because we're subjective about our own experiences. And it's easy to do, you know? It's easy to go, oh, it's all men are evil, all men are bad, I hate men, men are all abusers, but that's not true. Because, and women can be abusers too, and it does happen. And this is one thing I will say on behalf of men. Women do have resources. Men have none when it comes to being victims of abuse. There aren't shelters for victims of abuse that are male. There aren't any. I don't know a single one. Never even heard of it. Their therapy is, like, frowned upon. For men, there's, like, a stigma around a man going to therapy still to this day. They don't have any resources. And so it is important that we acknowledge that there are male victims too, and that there are still good men out there, and that we have to collectively come together and stand against abuse, not against each other.
Yeah.
We have to stand against abuse. Not women standing against men, not men standing against women. We have to get the defenses and put them out the door and go, abuse is wrong. And victims deserve to be heard. Victims deserve to speak out about their abuse and their abuser. And it needs to be talked about. And we have to fight for each other.
I think the important part, and I hope other people realize this by listening to our conversation, is that none of us are, what's funny is we may all really dislike these guys.
Yes.
We're not bashing them at all. Like, we're literally, first of all, telling true stories. And the point of sharing those stories is because so many people still to this day refuse to acknowledge that these things really happen outside of television.
Yeah.
And that real successful women who have, you know, healthy and normal relationships have been in those instances. People, they want to make this weird little bubble of only certain types of people go through that. And it's important that other people who, I guess, others may look at as normal can talk about their experiences too, because those things might not feel normal, right? Like, hearing all that stuff, I could imagine people are like, what the hell? Like, whoa, that's insane. And it happens every day to people that you would never expect. And so my point is, I hope people gather from that part of the conversation that we were not bashing anyone.
I dislike abusive men.
Well,
yes,
sure.
But I don't dislike men.
I dislike abusive human beings.
Exactly. I dislike abusive women.
There are children who are abusive that I dislike. You know what I'm saying? Like, I've watched them where I'm like, we need to do
someone
something
discipline
about this.
here, please.
Well, I'm like, somebody needs to teach this child that that's not okay to act that way, you know?
Yeah.
And so it's really like, that's the whole point of it all. And at the end of the day, it's never okay for any human being to treat another person that way.
Right.
It doesn't matter who they are.
Yeah, I agree.
And that's, you know, it doesn't matter where they're at in life. It doesn't matter what color, what gender, it doesn't matter. It's never okay to treat someone that way.
If you have that within you, that you want to, if you have that kind of rage and anger and bitterness and resentfulness and need for control and all of these things within you, that you could be capable of that and you're doing that, you need help. And I don't say that in like a derogatory way. I say that because if you don't break that cycle, your children will be just like you. Their children will be just like them because it is generational. Abusers are generational.
With someone like that.
Yes.
Or they'll be that victim because they'll think that's normal.
Yes, exactly.
And it's a heavy conversation. I think we just need to say it again. Like, we understand. I think everybody in this space and just in the world need to understand that. Do we want to spend all of our time discussing ugly and heavy things? No. And I feel like these conversations are not that. I feel like these conversations are in a direction and with a positive spin on the fact that, like, we're just discussing a truth and ways for people to understand it and maybe make others not feel alone.
Yeah.
And know that there is a way to deal and you're not crazy and all those things. And I think that's the most important part.
And if you are a man or a woman and you've heard this topic and you kind of brush it off and you think, oh, whatever, it's not, half the people are lying. All you have to do is look at the statistics. Because even if you think a person is lying, the people that are doing the reports on these things aren't. Like, there are literally statistics. Just look at the statistics. Even if you don't want to believe it's happening or it's true, look at the statistics and you will see that you're actually wrong. And being willing to learn about it, being open-minded to hearing about it, and sitting in the conversations is really important. Do you have any final thoughts? Like, any final statements that you want to make to anyone who's listening?
I think I'm just going to repeat what I said earlier, that whether you're in an abusive relationship or just a relationship that you know isn't healthy and you're not fulfilled, and it's okay to leave. You don't have to stay because you feel bad for the other person. And honestly, that's not even best for them either.
They can't heal until you leave and give them the space to heal.
And we've talked a lot about abusive men, and I by no means, that's not my perspective of men in general. There are lots of good men out there. I'm with an amazing man now. And so I don't want that to get, and I know we've said it multiple times, but I just want to, reiterate that this is by no means we're saying all men are like this, but there's enough of a problem that, people aren't just messaging you, they're messaging us about how much this is changing their lives. So I don't know, I guess my main takeaway is, if you're in a relationship and it's not good and you're not happy, it's okay to leave.
Yes.
That is reason enough.
Doesn't even have to get abusive before you make the choice to leave if it's not healthy for you.
And that's not dramatic.
Yeah.
Like, that's the thing. We live in a world that makes us think that standing up for ourselves or whatever is dramatic. Like, there's a way to do it that's dramatic, sure. Like, to be passive aggressive and mean
And honestly,
and whatever.
that's your prerogative.
You're right. That's do you. But it's mainly, I think my biggest, like, last final thought moment is just the fact that, like, none of this is a blame game. And if anyone heard any of this as a blame, I welcome them to listen back again.
Yeah.
Because in none of these moments were any of us blaming anyone for anything. That's not it. These are real stories, whether you like them or not. And it's how you deal with it after the fact that really matters the most.
Yes.
And it's just the conversation of acknowledging that this stuff is real and happens. And that doesn't mean you need to go on, the street corner and scream to the people about it. But don't ignore it.
Yeah.
Don't pretend like it's not a thing.
Yeah.
I think that's a huge step towards what we need to have these conversations, is just for people to not ignore that this is a reality.
Yeah. I think I would wrap this up with your voice matters.
I was going to say your happiness matters. I wanted to say one more thing.
Your voice matters, and you deserve to be heard, and you deserve to tell your story, and you are justified in that, whether anyone else acknowledges it or believes you or not. It doesn't matter. And we need you to speak up for yourself. We need you to speak up so that other victims know it's okay. And also the voices of people who aren't victims matter on this topic as well. It really does. Your voice matters too. Being willing to take a stand, being willing to speak out against it, being willing to stand up for victims is so, so incredibly important.
And sometimes standing up for a victim means just listening to them.
Yeah, listening, believing them.
Listening to them. Well, how can I help? What do you need?
Yeah.
You don't have to go storm in the house. And, it's like it can be just so simple as believing someone.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Kindness matters.
It really does. Seriously.
And that's a wrap for another episode of This Is Where We Heal. We'll see you guys next week.